Okay, so we'll start. I'm just going to go back to... Okay, so I'd like to start with an acknowledgement that the Adelaide region is the traditional land of the Kaurna people, and we respect their role as custodians of the Adelaide region. And we also acknowledge their spiritual relationship with country and the ongoing importance of their cultural and heritage beliefs. So, hello, and welcome to today's presentation, based on items held in the collections of the State Library of South Australia. Now, I'm just going to fiddle here for a moment, because something's gone a little bit awry. I've started at the end. I was wondering why things weren't looking quite right, so just bear with me. Close your eyes if you are prone to epilepsy, and we'll get there in a moment. Sort of a backwards preview. Right, okay, that's better. All right. Okay. So, welcome. Today's presentation is, as usual, based on items held in the collections of the State Library of South Australia. And today, Sipping History takes a look at some of Adelaide's early tea rooms and cafés from the 19th century, late 19th century, to the early 20th century. There's also a very brief nod to the coffee houses and coffee palaces. I haven't deliberately excluded coffee houses because of a distinct preference for tea, although that's true, and I'm proud of it.
Could you speak in the microphone?
Yes, is that a little better? Yeah, sorry, I'm just a bit wary of hitting the microphone with my pages, which I was doing earlier. Okay, can you hear me more clearly now? Terrific, okay. Okay, so as I was saying, Sipping History, today's presentation, takes a look at some of Adelaide's early tea rooms and cafes from the 19th to the early 20th centuries. As I was saying, I haven't deliberately excluded coffee houses, but it's partly because most of the city's refreshment rooms served both tea, coffee, and as well, cocoa and chocolate. The coffee lounges, which many of us will still remember from the 1950s onwards, they first really appeared in the 1930s, and they deserve a whole presentation of their own, as do the temperance coffee palaces, which served quite a different purpose to the coffee lounges and the coffee houses of Britain and Europe. It would be impossible to look at each of the dozens of cafes, refreshment rooms and tea rooms in Adelaide and surrounds in under an hour. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview today, and I'll be going into a little bit more detail about several of the best known. Most of these were or became family businesses, and many of them began as bakeries and confectioners. Many also changed names, locations, owners, lessees, some of them frequently, and it was very hard to trace which cafe operated where and who owned it or leased it. Fortunately, this work was done by two indefatigable researchers, and their work resulted in this. I'll come back to it at the very end. It's over 800 pages. It is fabulous, and it's not a heavy read. It's fun. It's a beautiful book. You can see I've gone through it. So that's by James Smith and Darryl Thompson, and as I said, I'll come back to that later. Okay, much of the work done for that huge tome, by the way, was done using the State Library collections. I'm just checking, can you still hear me okay? Okay, if not, just put up your hand and just ask me to speak up. All right, so the image that we're looking at shows the bird's eye view of central Adelaide, and it was a set of 4 images published by the Pictorial Australian in May of 1885. Hammer and Co., local photographers, took the image from the chimney top of Burford and Sons factory in Sturt Street, but because technology was not able to reproduce actual photos until a bit later, until the 1890s, instead they did an artwork, a coloured artwork, and that was based on the photographs. So we're going to look first at Rundle Street, which was very complicated. Okay, all right. So this sign advertises the Griffith brothers. Brothers James and John Griffiths were very successful importers of coffee, tea, cocoa and chocolate. In 1901, they had outlets in other states as well. Then they moved to South Australia. In 1901, having moved from Hindmarsh, they opened their new warehouse and retail outlet at number 49 Rundle Street. And they were strategically based in exactly the right location at that time. This is 1901. Why strategic? Because it was part of Adelaide's most popular shopping area at the time. So Rundle Street was full of department stores, and it soon attracted cafés selling refreshments, especially tea and coffee. Cafés required large supplies, of course, of tea, coffee, and then cocoa and chocolate. And of course, these beverages came with all manner of delectable cakes and pastries and biscuits. In fact, the cakes and pastries probably came first because most or many of the cafés originated from people running bakeries. The refreshment rooms provided a sales outlet for the bakeries and a way, of course, to sample the quality of the baked goods and confectionaries. We're looking at the moment at the north side of Rundle Street, looking east. The chemist shop in the left foreground stood about 30 metres east of King William and Rundle Street corner. The tall, narrow building on the left is the premises of E.S. Wigg & Sons Stationers. The near side of the double-fronted 4-storey building shows Donaldson's department store, and on the far side is Marshall's Furniture Company. And right down you will see a balcony by the second telegraph pole, and that is the balcony of the Globe Hotels. That's further along. And I'm just going to go in for a close-up. This enlargement from that original image, you can see the two Doric pillars. So you can see Gents, Rouse, Taylor. And then either side you'll see those two pillars. And there's a shield-like sign that says luncheon, and up the top it says Indian tea. That entranceway through the Doric columns leads to the Indian tea rooms at 18 Rundle Street. This was another of the city's earlier tea rooms. It operated from 1884 to 1897. As the name suggests, it originally specialised in just Indian tea, so it really was a tea rooms. And then it broadened its offerings over time and offered more standard fare, one of which was cold meat and luncheons. Another early place of refreshment was the Oriental tea rooms on the southern side at the corner of Rundle Street and James Place. We don't have an image of that, but we know it ran from 1885 to 1895, and it was run by one of the first women to run a tea rooms on her own, and her name was Mrs. Rosa Donaldson. She'd also been involved in the industry running refreshment rooms down at Port Adelaide. Then later the Indian tea rooms that we're looking at there. And when the Indian tea rooms, they were on the opposite side of the road, on the southern side, when they moved to this location on the northern side, Mrs. Donaldson took over their premises and called it the Oriental. The tea rooms tended to offer lighter fare than the earlier cafes, which usually specialised in lunchtime meals, which were pretty heavy. In fact, there were complaints at one stage because the tea rooms offered light luncheons, and mainly the men, the businessmen and the workers in the city area wanted sausages and meat and hot vegetables. They wanted a proper lunch for a worker. So when the cafes started to spring up, there were a couple of letters a few more than a couple, letters at various times complaining, and it was all a bit prissy for them. So they tended to go more then to hotel lunches and various other things. So there we are. That's still on the northern side. And you can see Marshall's there. And you can see it's quite a busy shopping area. And what that fluctuation, they're doing dance classes upstairs in the art gallery. They're not really doing dance classes. They're walking heavily. Well, walking is enough to set this off. It is a very old building after all, the Institute building. Okay, and you can see what looks like a carpet or something on the front of the horse-drawn vehicle in front of Marshall's. So I don't know whether they were moving a carpet in or moving it out, but it was certainly very, very popular for furniture shopping and furnishings.
Is that where Milo is now?
It would be, now let me think, southern side. Sorry, northern side. Yes, so it would be around where Myers is now. And the side we're looking at, we'll get to, is City Cross. Okay, so now we're looking at the opposite side of the road, at the northern side. And I'll go into this in more detail with enlargements in a few minutes. But basically, you can see the big Griffiths Brothers tea. We know that's number 49. You can see underneath Griffiths tea, T. Durea photographer. Now that tells me that our catalogue is wrong when it says that this image was taken in about 1890, 96, something like that, because the Griffiths brothers didn't take it over until the early 1900s. And we know that Thelma Durea did not move into that premises. Can you see the photographic sign just under Griffiths Teas on the balcony? Thelma Durea moved in there in 1902, and we know that because we have records. Prior to that, that marks a spot of quite a famous tea rooms of the time, the Café de Paris, and we'll get to that. You can see Bricknell's Cafe further along, so we're going backwards towards the hills in that direction, King William Street about 30 metres behind us. So about, Thelma Durea is about where the City Cross entrance is now, if that makes sense. Okay, and then there's also the London Tailors, which I think became the London Cafe. It's very hard to keep track. There's another view of the road, and from this one I've taken, okay, this might make it a little clearer. So, blue is at number 39, and that is the second side of the Café de Paris from 1889 to 1901, was originally in King William Street. Green is Bricknell's, and that operated a little bit later. And in fact, they'd been in the YMC beforehand, and then they moved to Rundle Street. And the other one, the yellow, is the one we're going to look at now, which is Kinderman's Cafe. Okay, so there's Cawthorne's, Bricknell's, Cawthorne's Pianos, and there's Kinderman's right over the top. Okay, Charlotte Brothers also, you can see there it says Charlotte Brothers Groceries, and I think that says Tea-Men, if I'm reading that correctly, but they were tea merchants as well. A lot of grocers sold bulk tea, but they sold to the retail trade, whereas Griffith Brothers originally only operated for the businesses and for trade. Okay, so the Kindermans. On what you're seeing there is a very fond obituary for a Mrs. Kinderman. Now, that's Mrs. Kinderman. This very esteemed lady was the wife of Mr. Gustav Kinderman and the mother of their two sons. The obituary is quite long, but it goes on to talk about what a great and loving philanthropist she was, how she was known for her regular visits to the poor and her unstinting generosity. It was a beautiful obituary, but there was something missing. Right at the beginning, before I took this extract, it gives her family name and her origins in Germany, right at the beginning of the piece. But it never mentions throughout a very long obituary her given name. So I became very curious. And this is where libraries come in really handy, particularly research libraries, reference libraries. I went to the State Library's family history resources and I found in the death index a date of a woman who was survived by Mr. Gustav Kinderman. She died at the age of 53. In the dates coincide, 20th of August 1885, and she was then 53 years old, and her name was Julie, so I was quite happy about that. So that's Julie Kinderman. Okay, so the Kindermans was very, very famous. Now I'll just go back a little bit. It was renowned, Kindermans, across Adelaide and South Australia and beyond, both for its atmosphere, because the Kindermans were very, very welcoming, and also for its wonderful cakes. Their bakehouse, again, a bakery, cafe, bakery, cafe, bakery, cafe, very seldom worked in the other direction. So the Kindermans' motto was fresh every day, and pretty well were. According to this 1918 article in the Mail, they not only sent cakes interstate, but they exported them as far as the Far East and Africa. I'm guessing those weren't the cream cakes. More to the point, Kindermans kept their staff for many, many years. And the reporter noted that they were familiar with every branch of their art, which contributes to the uniform quality the firm maintains for their goods. And this is taken from the opening ceremony. This article notes that prior to the advent of electric trams, a line of buses stopped close to the cafe, which led to its popularity for nighttime meetings. So remember, it's right near the corner of King William Street and what was then Rundle Street, now Rundle Mall. And it says, the article goes on to say, gatherings of all kinds were held there, and it may be said that the fate of even ministries has been decided over the coffee the proprietors provided. And it wasn't the only place where the future of South Australia was decided, or certainly planned or campaigned for. So, that big arrow pointing at Thelma Durea's premises again, this was the Café de Paris. It was 37 Rundle Street, marked by the blue arrow, and as I'd mentioned earlier, it was its second location. The proprietor, Mrs. Mary Aish, had operated an earlier Café de Paris from 1885 in King William Street, but unfortunately a sewer pipe burst and it flooded the basement where the cafe was. It only flooded it with water, according to the newspaper reports, but it was a sewer pipe, who knows. But anyway, the carpets were ruined, the tablecloths were ruined, and Mrs. Aish went on to reopen the Café de Paris in Rundle Street in 1889, and it remained a cafe until 1901, and that's when it was leased to Thelma Durea. Mrs. Aish had gone by then. She sort of came in and out of the proprietorship, so she was there twice, and there were other owner proprietors, lessees in between. Now, the site itself of the Café de Paris had had a very checkered career. In 1879, the Academy of Music had opened there as a theatre and music venue, and it had a cafe and refreshment rooms on its ground floor. That was then called 41 Rundle Street. It gets a bit confusing trying to track dates because there was a time when street numbers were changed, and I'm still having trouble trying to work out what went where, but there seems to be a disparity of about 3 numbers. It gets even more confusing because a lot of proprietors of businesses simply refused to change their advertising, so they went on advertising at the old numbers. but the numbers had been changed. So it's an interesting area to research. Okay. Anyway, so the cafe opened in 1879, that we do know. We also know that in January, this is summer, remember, in January of 1884, there was a fire, which is pictured here. A year later, also in January, another fire. In December 1886 came a third fire, and this one cost 2 lives. I think it was the firefighters who died. So fire was common, particularly with eating establishments and photographic studios. The building was rebuilt and it reopened 2 years later as Mr. Wickland's coffee saloon. It only lasted 15 months, and Mrs. H took over the premises and began the Café de Paris, which was much more of a tea rooms. A short time later, it became Faulkner's Café de Paris, then a couple more proprietors, and then Mrs. H returned in 1899. In 1901, the Café de Paris was taken over by a Miss Clooney and a Mr. Thomas, and then it ceased operations altogether as a cafe. In 1902, it became Thelma Durea's photographic studio, which you see there. And that's how come, you know, if you're looking at a photograph of the street and it says 1890, it can't be 1890, because, for 2 reasons. Griffith's Teas opened that building in 1901 and put up their sign, and Thelma didn't move into late 1901, 1902. So it's nice knowing that sort of stuff. It makes you feel terribly superior. That takes a lot, by the way. Okay, all right, so here are some images of the cafe in its heyday as Faulkner's Café de Paris, and this is taken from a promotional card, which in turn was reproduced in the book Fair Adelaide, which came out around about 1908, I think, from memory. It was kind of like Fair Adelaide was like a big publicity shot of Adelaide, with lots of advertising by lots of businesses, lots of schools and a few churches, particularly the private schools we're talking about. There they go, with their pliés and their paintbrushes. Okay. All right. So, I mentioned earlier that a number of cafes featured large spaces, and those spaces were hired out for weddings, birthdays, private celebrations of all kinds, and they also provided venues for social clubs and community groups. This was when public transport was in its infancy, as were the suburbs, and the city was a convenient place to meet. This was particularly so if your concerns were based around Parliament House on North Terrace. And the Friends of Women's Suffrage had a definite interest in Parliament House, especially in the days leading up to the crucial vote on giving women the vote, women's suffrage, in December of 1894. But things didn't always run smoothly. So you can see there's the welcome, the public notice, welcome to Miss Spence by Friends of Women's Suffrage at the Café de Paris, and it's 8 o'clock sharp. And you can see that it's being addressed by Miss Spence, Mrs. Nichols, who was Temperance, leader of the Temperance movement, yes. Miss George, who I think was her assistant, the Reverend J.D. Thompson, and others, with special reference in big letters to the bill now before Parliament. And that, of course, was the Women's Suffrage Bill. Okay, but this is an excerpt from Ever Yours, C.H. Spence. And that's the title of an edited version of Catherine Helen Spence's long correspondence, her diary and her autobiography. It was edited by Susan McGarry and Barbara Wall. So there's Catherine on the side, on the left. Miss Spence, of course, was a great social reformer and a writer and author, newspaper reporter, did so many things, children's reform. but she wasn't great on women's suffrage. She really wasn't, and she admits that herself. However, she was on a tour of America for a large part of the women's suffrage campaign, and when she came back, she was feted, and because she was so famous, the women's suffrage movement immediately pulled her to their cause, not that she was against it, and said, can you help us? And so with her strength of reputation behind them, that really helped them, I think, to gain public support and push it through. On the far side, on the right, your right, my right, is Mary Lee, who was also a key campaigner. Many of you will have heard of her. And she was a key mover and shaker, and she did an awful lot of groundwork during that suffrage campaign. So this excerpt from Catherine Helen Spence's edited autobiography reads, I went to the committee meeting of women's suffrage at 4. Mrs. Mary Lee in great dudgeon, because my welcome had been arranged outside of her, and she was not advertised as speaker, because she had said she could not or would not go. I soothed her down, and she consented to be present after all. We then returned to the house and heard a great deal of washy speaking against the bill. We had to go to Mrs. Thomas's to snatch a meal, and I had 10 minutes to collect my thoughts, and we went to the welcoming meeting, which was well attended and most enthusiastic. So, things were not always as rosy as they appeared on the surface, but they did smooth it over. Bricknell's Café, which came along a bit later, was also the meeting place for some hefty social reform groups, such as the Women's Non-Party Association of South Australia. The movement was inaugurated on the 2nd of June 1909 by the activist Vida Goldstein, who was president of the Women's Political Association of Victoria, and it was presided over by Catherine Helen Spence and attended by around 60 women. It was a very interesting movement because the Women's Non-Party Association had a very strong platform. It included equal pay for equal work, equal custody and guardianship of children, equal marriage and divorce laws, and the appointment of women inspectors for all institutions involving women and children, and women police matrons. So for the time, that was extremely progressive. Bricknell's, on a lighter note, was often very innovative in its bid to attract clientele. And Bricknell's, in this advert about foodology, I looked it up, by the way, there's no such thing except for a Korean company that sells vitamin supplements under that name. But back in the day, Bricknell's coined foodology, and it was about the science and art of food preparation. And they were appealing to the growing interest, particularly on the part of women, in science, the arts, hygiene and cooking skills in this 1911 advertisement. Okay, so I'm going to take a moment to show you a useful online tool for those who are interested in family history or tracing a building or a house location or general historical research into SA places. I found personally the locations of the various cafes and tea rooms very confusing, mainly, I think, as I've mentioned, due to the constant changes of name and proprietor and the very close proximity of one business to another, and of course those street numbers. Walking from one end of Rundle Mall several times to the other didn't help, because most of the current businesses, you probably know, don't display numbers. It's very confusing. One of the best ways to work it out for me was to go to the directories, generally referred to as Sands and McDougall's, although they were produced by a number of other publishers at different times. Now, the easiest way to find the directories is to go to the State Library homepage. You'll see lots of icons under the main image, and you scroll down until you see the family history icon, which is here on the right. And then you click on that icon, and it takes you to the What's Inside, as in What's Inside Family History online page. And on that What's Inside online page, there are a large number of family history resources. So you scroll down to this icon, our almanacs and directories, which is in that What's Inside online page. You click on that and you'll find yourself in the directories, which are searchable online by name or by street and various other methods, but we'll stay with street for now. So I've searched a couple of the cafes and I got really confused, so then I searched Rundle Street, and this is what happened. Now, each of those numbers, of those arrows, indicates a different cafe or bakery. The blackish, thinner ones indicate confectioners or bakers and confectioners, and it doesn't say anything about a cafe. They just sell the goods. Some of them then did, as I said, open up as cafes later. This is from 1901, and you can see there, top of that, I've just taken excerpts from the first two columns, those enlargements. So the first column is Rundle Street on the south side, and it comes down to James Place. You'll see Bricknell's. Before that, you'll see, Kinderman's. So this is the right side coming from William Street down what is now Rundle Mall. So on that right side, you'd come first to Kinderman's. A little bit later, you'd find Bricknell's. A little bit later still, you'd find the Café de Paris, and at 4950, you'd find the warehouse for Griffith Brothers, and more about that building later, because that also comes into one of the stories I'm going to tell you. Okay, if that's all too confusing for you, don't worry, just give us a ring or go and talk to the front desk and they'll show you how to use it. It took me a while. Okay, so let's now take a look at one of South Australia's best known brands, Balfour's, and it began as a joint venture, or under joint names, Calder and Balfour. And there we are, that's Fair Adelaide again, another advert for bakers, and you'll see they're bakers and confectioners. The two often went together. And here's their biscuit factory. Although it's called the City Steam Biscuit Factory, you'll see from the cart that it's Calder and Balfour's. Wholesale, steam, and I think that's biscuits. It might be steam produce. Okay, so here's the biscuit factory in 1880. Now, in 1853, Scottish immigrants James Calder and his wife Margaret, whose Christian family name was Balfour, established their first bakery and shop at 130 Rundle Street in Adelaide. So that's much further down. And on the northern side. 6 years later, Margaret's nephew, John Balfour, joined the firm as a baker's apprentice, and the firm became very famous for its biscuits. They even supplied them to royalty when Queen Victoria's son, Prince Alfred, visited Australia in 1867. So John Balfour, their son, became a partner in the firm, and he renamed it Calder and Balfour. James retired 5 years later, but under his direction, the company expanded and was exporting goods to other Australian colonies. However, building a great new factory in Adelaide stretched the finances, and the depression of the 1890s led to the company's collapse. But despite the setbacks, they bounced back. So here we see 4 people in 1903. So that's a good 5 to 7 years later. And it's instead of a cart and horse, they've got a modified 1903. That, by the way, is an Oldsmobile. Take note, Mark. Mark's responsible for our wonderful Holden exhibition revision. So car person, revhead person, and lots of other things. Okay. So yes, that's an Oldsmobile motor delivery wagon. And it's taken behind Balfour's former factory, which is the corner of Morford and Franklin Streets, no longer there as a factory. And, okay, so around 1909, you see here on the left, nearest to you, and a little bit along, you'll see lots of very fashionable women, round about 1909, maybe a little bit earlier, and they're window shopping in all those wonderful shops on the, I think that's the southern side. Down a little is Charlotte Brothers at number 68. Then the cat stores, and the near side of Balfour's Café is 2 yards west of Francis Street.
Could you speak up again?
Yes, sorry, I'm away from the microphone. Thank you. Is that better? Okay. So I was just talking about women wearing hats and window shopping and pointing out Balfour's tea rooms in 1908. By 1915, this advert had appeared in Adelaide, Queen City of the South. And it tells you that they're at 74 Rundle Street and also King William Street North and King William Street South, Adelaide, and confectioners, but they also ran the Balfour's cafes. And you can see the interior of the cafe with what was called the ladies' lounge. Now, ladies' lounges were really important, and it became a selling point to advertise that we have a ladies' balcony or a ladies' restroom, a ladies' lavatory. That was a big seller. And in one advert I saw, I can't remember which one, it said that the establishment offers a ladies' boudoir. And I took a step back and went, what? But when I looked up the actual meaning of boudoir, it does actually mean a place of rest. So they were just being a bit fancy, but our understanding of boudoir, of course, is a bedroom. And you go, Rundle Street, bedroom. I thought they were on the... Anyway, so that was a little confusing, but it was ridgy-dig. They did offer boudoirs and restrooms and ladies' lavatories, which was very nice for the ladies. Because prior to that, as I'd mentioned, the luncheon places, they were eateries. They were heavy duty. They were for the men. And women often didn't feel very welcome. Or you were talking about pubs with lots of boozing. And by now you've got a big temperance movement, the Women's Christian... the Women's, I always get it wrong, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, WCTU, led by Mrs. Nichols and co. And that was taking hold in a very big way across Australia, but particularly in South Australia. And the WCTU were very important in terms of getting the women's vote. So, okay, so here are a couple more of their places of work now, of their cafes. Now, just getting, yes. So the one on the left, that's the Balfour Limited Grand Café. And remember that big Griffith sign that keeps popping up at number 49? Well, the image on the right shows the business premises of Balfour Workshop Limited. They changed the name a little while later. The Griffiths Brothers building was bought by Balfour's in 1919 and they remodelled it. So their business premises were up the top and the Windsor Café was down the bottom. And that opened in 1922 and the Windsor remained a cafe right up until 1964. It was one of the longest running cafe tea rooms in Adelaide. By the mid-1920s, the three Balfour's cafes in the city were very much in. They were the cool place to hang out. Businessmen, and by then some business women, city workers and society mavens all took tea there. The Balfour's bakers developed some appealing new products, including that South Australian icon, the frog cake. Now, legend has it that one of the Balfours sampled the wares of a Parisian patisserie, for real, went to Paris. And shortly after his return to Adelaide in about 1923, the frog cake was born. Balfour stayed a family business for many decades, run by Elizabeth Balfour's son Jack and her son-in-law Charles Worship. And in 1924, the company changed its name to Balfour Workshop Proprietary Limited. Then San Remo in 2008, San Remo Pasta took over Balfour's business. And then in 2023, it was sold on again to the Western Australian-owned Australian Pie Company. So although the business of Balfour's no longer runs old-style refreshment rooms, there is a sales outlet in the city, and I have it on good authority that the frog lives on. So the refreshment rooms that I've shown you so far are just a sample of what existed. I'm going to take now a very quick look at some in other areas of the city and beyond. So I'm just going to flick through these. Okay. On the left is a 1910 view of King William Street, taken by Ernest Goll. This is near Weymouth Street, King William Street near Weymouth Street. This ornate three-storey building houses mainly insurance companies, the Norwich Union Fire Office, South Australian Insurance Company Limited, and the Mutual Life and Citizens Assurance Company. The Criterion Hotel is on the southern side, and D. Politis offers afternoon tea at the Athenaeum, which you can see down the bottom right of that image. Sorry, I'll go back. On the right is an image again from about 1920, and it shows Turner's Café in the industrial building at 53 King William Street. This is Turner's, and it attracted, this is the days before television, and really cinema hadn't gotten going very much for a daytime treat, although this looks to be early evening. For some reason, the Turner's display attracted a lot of people, and I suspect they were looking at something like this. It might have been close to the opening, I'm not sure. I'm going to take, I'll just go on with that. Yes, okay. The 1897 view of the western side of King William Street, this view was taken by Ernest Goll. You can see the post office on the corner of Franklin Street, a watchmaker and jeweller, the Criterion, and where that arrow is pointing, upstairs is Esselbach's Café, and that one came complete with ladies' refreshment rooms. They advertised it. And there were many others. Most of the buildings which housed them are long gone or unrecognisable, at least on the lower levels. And here's the Theatre Royal. That cafe was under the Theatre Royal itself at 32A Hindley Street, now a car park. I had to include Bert Edwards' tea rooms on the eastern side of Compton Street, Adelaide. This was taken in February of 1912. Bert Edwards is on the left, and he's standing there with an employee in uniform. And they do look like they deliver quite good tea room service. However, a two-up school was what it was actually for. It was conducted in the rear of the premises, and there was quite a bit of sly grogging. When I say sly grogging, we didn't have prohibition, but we had closing. And there are many stories of kegs of beer being rolled across at night from a nearby pub. But I assumed that the beer was served in very nice teacups. Now, I said I'd mention coffee palaces. So this is my mention of coffee houses, rather. The arrow marks the location of what was most likely the first dedicated coffee house in Adelaide. This is King William Street, looking north from Pirie Street, and it's around about 1866 to about 1867. And then there were the coffee palaces, and there were quite a few of them. Here are just a couple. They were run on temperance lines, so no alcohol. They offered accommodation and food for country folk, particularly the shearers and labourers. The idea was that shearers would come into the towns after they'd worked really, really hard and they had their pay in their pocket, and they just wanted to spend it because they'd been isolated for so long. And they would generally spend it on booze and on women. So the temperance movement and various other church agencies got together and said, we've got to stop this. And they already had the temperance movement elsewhere, particularly in America, but it then came to Australia. And the idea was if we can build places where it is safe for these men to stay, and it was mainly men and some families, then they won't spend their money on prostitutes, they won't blow their dough on booze, and everyone will be a lot better off for it. Plus, we can make money out of nice tea and coffee and more genteel drinks. Okay. That was Adelaide Coffee Palace became Stutley's Grand Coffee Palace. A lot of name changes. Then there was Grayson's, which was opposite the railway station, and my favourite. These are the plans of premises for well-known butcher Leopold Conrad's Austral stores in Hindley Street, showing the front and the back elevations. The Austral stores were opened in 1903, and in 1905 the Austral stores were converted to a temperance hotel, which became West's Coffee Palace in Hindley Street, a landmark. The architect was Albert Seymour Conrad, who was born in Adelaide in 1868, one of the Conrad family. After his schooling, he was articled to David Garlick, who was quite a well-known Adelaide architect. And then after working for a government department, he started his own practice, and that in turn became a family affair, although not a bakery, when his brother Frank joined him. And Albert Conrad's, or the Conrad brothers actually, architectural commissions comprised hotels, residences, ecclesiastical buildings, particularly for the Catholic Church, schools and banks. They worked predominantly in the Gothic or Romanesque style, and they used stonework and banding to create a highly decorative appearance. Now, at that time, that was unique amongst South Australia's architectural offerings. And there it is. That was taken quite a while ago, actually. I think it was late 1990s. But you can see the stonework. Okay, here's another design by Albert Seymour Conrad and Frank Conrad, just a few years later. And these are the plans for a new refreshment kiosk at Waterfall Gully. Construction began and the refreshment rooms were formally opened by Sir Day Bosanquet on November the 9th, 1912, and it was built in the style of a Swiss chalet. So we've just got about 5 minutes, so I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. So here's a view of the finished product. The building was rumoured to be haunted by the ghost of a firefighter who died from burns suffered in 1926. And I'm waving there because I like my ghosts. So Mark's just looking at me from the back. Okay, all right. So the tourism industry was opening up in the pre-war 1900s, and of course the refreshment rooms or the kiosks of many of the new tourism hotspots were a feature, and they were tea rooms, which also served coffee and sandwiches and cakes. And this is one of my favourite. That previous one was the Botanic Gardens kiosk, which opened in 1907. The centenary. So although tea and scones were a feature, so of course were the ice creams. This is one of my favourite images, and it was taken at Moriata Falls in probably the late 20s or very early 30s. Okay, and of course ice creams are a major part of any summer holiday, especially at the beach. So you can see a band there on the right. The Henley kiosk went through many proprietors and was known as both the Henley Café, that's the turreted building on the left, and the Henley kiosk. And that leads into the last of the famous tea rooms or cafes of Adelaide of the time. Henley Beach by then was quite a fashionable suburb. A lot of money had been put into buildings, and a lot of money was put into the Esplanade in particular. This kiosk was built around 1912 by the MTT, that's the Municipal Tramways Trust, some of you may remember, and it was at the terminus of their new electric tram route, and the aim was to attract more passengers to what was now rapidly becoming the Henley Seaside Resort. So between 1912 and the early 1950s, the kiosk saw many lessees come and go, but the one of most interest to me were Ellis Limited, and they ran the kiosk between 1919 and 1920. On the left there is an artist's interpretation of the corner of James Place and Rundle Street, as it was in about 1880, showing the Norfolk Arms Inn on the corner. The caption reads, "Early Days of Adelaide, corner of James Place and Rundle Street, site of the Maple Leaf Café." sorry, I'll just go back. On the right is the same artist's interpretation of that same area. Shows the folding building, FH Folding, the Grand Theatre, and the new Maple Leaf Café. This is, Ellis owned a number of buildings. This is the interior of the Covent Garden Café, taken in 1947. It was known as the House of Food Treasures. Halfway along on the left, you may just see what looks like a stairway, and there's a sign, and the sign says first floor restaurant, or 2 first floor restaurant. In 1948, the building was the scene of a tragic fire. It began downstairs, went up into the kitchen. They managed to get the diners evacuated safely, but 5 staff were killed when they were trapped as the fire spread upwards through the flue in the kitchen area. What then happened was that the Covent Garden was replaced by this building on the right, which was the Commercial Banking Group's building. The Ellis family were distraught by what had happened, and they did not want to rebuild on that site. It's said that the fire haunted some of those remaining family members of the Ellis family. They felt very responsible for their employees, and it hit particularly Percy Ellis. The Ellis people worked very hard to make their employees feel part of the operation. This photograph shows members of the organising committee at a picnic in 1924. Ellis looked after their staff, and their staff remained loyal and remembered their time with the firm fondly. And I know that because as well as the papers of Ellis itself, unfortunately they were held off-site and I couldn't get to them while I was researching this, but we have Zita Smart's papers, and I'll show you very briefly something of hers in a little while. Zita was at the Arcadia. There were 3 main cafes. There was the Arcadia, the Covent Garden that I've just mentioned, and the Maple Leaf, which we're now going to finish with. And Zita worked at the Arcadia, and in 1989 she organised a reunion, and those papers, signatures and testimonies and all kinds of things, very fond memories of their time working at Ellis. This was a 35th anniversary dinner held in 1949, so just a year after the fire. But if you have a look, it was put on by the firm for its employees. And if you look at the numbers, so you see the bakery employees on the right, our guests, so it's guests of Ellis Caterers, the company, or Ellis Limited. And on the right, you'll see a bunch of numbers under the Arcadia, the Maple Leaf and the bakery. And those numbers range from around 6 or 7, 3 is the lowest number, and they go up to about 35, maybe 37. And all of those numbers is a year of service. So some of their employees worked 20 years, 26 years, 30, 37 years. They were very much a family-orientated company. There's a proper menu from what they offered to the public. And you'll see that they're very quite honest, but also very innovative with their advertising. And they put on the menus the service behind the service. And it says, would you have realised that the many items enumerated here are part of the service behind the service? I think that's brilliant. Okay, and now we're getting to the last thing we're looking at today, and this is the Maple Leaf Café, which we saw the artist's outline of a few minutes ago. It's a pretty accurate, I'll just take you back, pretty accurate representation, the best of everything. I just want to mention too that Ellis over time ran a number of cafes and restaurants. Among them were the Henley kiosk, which we've seen, the Quick Lunch Cafe, and Ellis's Tearooms, which is on the eastern side of the Central Market. And they also ran a well-known but fairly short-lived cafe called the Squirrel, which opened in 1926. This wasn't quite as successful as those 3 Ellis flagships that I've mentioned. It was a very slick, a very sleek nickel-plated eatery built along modern American lines, with customers selecting their own ready-to-eat food from a counter, and then they'd put it on a tray and they'd pay at the end, cafeteria style. Word was that it failed because Adelaideans were not prepared to carry their own trays. Although the worldwide depression certainly didn't help. So Ellis Limited were very innovative. They expanded into the ice cream business, took over the rights to Peter's Ice Cream in 1914. They introduced a soda fountain. They started making potato chips, you know, the skinny ones that you get in paper bags, not the fried ones. So they started making them USA style at the Ellis Bakery around 1924, about the time of the frog cakes by Balfour's actually, after Percy Ellis brought the idea back from America. But as I said, their most successful businesses were the Maple Leaf, the Arcadia, and the ill-fated Covent Garden. But the star was definitely the Maple Leaf. And this is one of the things that that they did. They were very good with advertising. This was a souvenir that I just found more or less by accident in the archives. And it shows a pictorial souvenir which was given out to customers when they went to the Maple Leaf. And it was that's actually a proper letter. You can see, you could fold it up, seal it, post it. And this one that we have is from to a Mr. Perry, Mount Gambier. So I'm thinking he might have been in hospital at the time. The letter basically talks about how she hopes he's getting over his cold and how she's visited his mother. It is a she. Her name is Olive, and she signs with 3 kisses. And that's what it looks like. So there we go. And this is the Ellis company that was left. It was taken after the period of this presentation, but it's 1946. So yes, it was. It was an anniversary dinner held at the Arcadia Cafe on the 27th of June 1946, just 2 years before the fire at the Covent Garden. So the cafe and tea rooms were many and various, and it would take a very large book to do them justice. And as I said, there is such a book. So massive work, 860 pages of meticulous research, and it's filled with images of the eating and refreshment, eataways, eateries of that first 124 years of not just British but European and Asian settlement. There are sections on the Greeks, the Italians, and what they brought to food, and it is absolutely fantastic. And it's designed for browsing. It's not a book that you read. You don't sit down like a novel and try to stay up all night and read it. You just dip in and out of it. And most of your information, the concise information, is done in about 2 pages, and there are all sorts of wonderful diagrams. It's just a magic book. I absolutely love it. Very, very hard to find now. It's out of print, but the library holds 2 copies, and you're welcome to look at them. So that's the end of today's presentation. Hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you back again in a month's time. Are there any questions for those?